Hello, my name is Amanda Cabrera and I will be talking about the problem of sex trafficking in Houston. So, a quick statistic. According to ABC 13 Houston News, there's a data that shows currently in the minors population alone, there is 79,000 victims of sex trafficking. However, this number more than doubles when we take into consideration that many adults are also victims. So, what exactly is sex trafficking? Sex trafficking is a form of human trafficking that has been around for decades and is a very serious topic and concern, especially in a hotspot city like Houston. According to the Trafficking Victim Protection Act of 2000, sex trafficking is seen as the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, obtaining, patronizing, or soliciting of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act. Quoted from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. These victims are usually forced into performing these actions. So, how I will present my information to you. The cases I will show you have been publicly shared and can be found in newspapers online. However, these are not the only cases and there is thousands that go unnoticed. Some of my sources include ABC 13, Fox 26, Houston Chronicle, and the News Center Maine. Two things to keep in mind. Sex trafficking is considered illegal with any person, but especially with those cases that include minors. And two is that sex trafficking does not stick to one age group or a certain gender. So, how does sex trafficking affect us? According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, sex trafficking can unstable the people around us mentally when someone we know is made a victim. There's a lot of suffrage that goes behind being in this situation. Sex trafficking can make one feel unsafe even in their own home. When there's constant cases, one begins to question if it's even safe going out in public. Communities begin to live in fear and their opportunities minimize as they are afraid to interact with others, losing the trust and not knowing others' intentions. Misconceptions about sex trafficking. Aside in sex trafficking within Houston, within our population there has been recently known to be false claims made about sex trafficking that makes police calls question the call they receive. One example that made it to the news was about zip ties being on car wipers. Another example I came across was on the app TikTok. And this said that sex traffickers will place honey in the mirror so one takes time to clean it and they are able to get the victim. This can cause chaos and give the wrong impression of how sex trafficking works to communities who believe these videos. Manqueros explained that sex trafficking is an absolute, almost epidemic in our area, and we are pleading families to understand that kids are way more vulnerable than they may think, and it's all through a gadget. Adults, teenagers, and children need to understand that sex trafficking works very strategically and know of a bigger, more realistic risk further than just a gadget, one being online. So, what are the primary causes of sex trafficking? There are multiple causes that go into sex trafficking, and they all have a big impact on this movement. From the article, 79,000 minors are victims of sex trafficking. In order to pay $1 million, we know that Texas is second to California in the state with the most number of victims for sex trafficking. Like stated with Ann Johnson, a former human trafficking prosecutor in Harris County, that says, I quote, hotlines might get more calls here. This means that Houston is more likely to receive a call from a family member or friend who knows of a sex trafficking case. So one of the reasons is sex traffickers going after the money. Sex trafficking is a well-networked business for certain individuals that are looking to make a profit. ABC 13 provides us of a story of Maris, who gained money from these women through prostitution and gained his clients by placing these victims in commercial sex advertisements online. If he ever felt the girls were not bringing him the profit desired, there will be further actions taken. Maris had an alternative to gaining money. I quote, Maris made one of them participate in a bank robbery. This goes to show that individuals running sex trafficking business are main profit is prostitution, but they are not limited to it. Like I stated previously at the top of the paragraph, the sex trafficker business becomes individuals' main income, which is why they continuously look for victims and customers. Another reason is the size and location of our city. Houston has many buildings where these businesses are able to be established and is surrounded by smaller cities and states. ABC 13 showed us how early in the year, I quote, 3 people, including 2 Kingwood area residents, have been arrested following the discovery of a missing 15-year-old girl from the Houston area. So this teen was found out of state in Louisiana when the local police pulled over a vehicle and found her inside the car. From this case, we can see that victims are often moved around with the purpose of them being less likely to be found. So, an increase in sex trafficking due to our current pandemic. Our ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has had an increase on sex trafficking. There has been many victims contacted online through different apps. The sex trafficking business have adapted and relied more on certain platforms in order to keep their clients and gain profit. This is due to the closure of many businesses. According to the Polaris report titled Crisis in Human Trafficking During the Pandemic, there was and continue to be, I quote, many agencies providing services to victims were also impacted and unable to receive new clients. So there are many sites and apps advertising these victims. One is Backpage.com, which is actually how a victim was found. I quote, her family saw her picture posted on Backpage.com and called the police, says Grace White. Through these apps, sex traffickers are able to put victims out there and advertise them without the client seeing them in person. In the Houston Chronicle article, Human Trafficking Spikes in Texas Amid Pandemic, it states, there are lots of sex trafficking victims who are forced to have sex on camera now. We saw a lot of that really spiked during COVID, says Olivia Tallett. Another reason is victims being lured with objects and affection. In the news article, Houston man convicted of sex trafficking in order to pay $1 million, it states a testimony from the girl that says, I quote, they each met marriage while still teenagers and how he had won them over with gifts and kindness before using threats, sexual abuse, and physical force to compel them to prostitution. So these victims were promised a lavish life that pushes them to run away from their homes. Once the victims are with the sex traffickers is when the real sides come out and the mistreatment starts. And once the victims realize their purpose, it is too late to go back home. So another reason is hotel and motels companies not reporting incidents. There have been several cases coming to light that were reported by victims or those around them. In sex trafficking victims' Houston hotel, we see that a victim, a 15-year-old girl, actually ended up suing 3 different Houston hotels where the allegation occurred from 2016 to 2017. The family attorney hopes that with this case, I quote, hopefully it will change the way hotels are being operated, I hope, quoted from White Grace. In this case, the hotel staff was involved because they were aware of the business going on. I quote, in the lawsuit, it claims that she was given free food and toiletries by hotel staff because they knew of her situation, says White Grace, and they still did not take action to get this minor out of this situation. The victim also stated, I quote, she was even solicited by the guy working from the front desk at the Clarion, says White Grace. So what solutions have been tried and how effective were these solutions? In the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, we see some solutions. One is the missing victim being broadcasted on the news. I don't believe this to be as effective because the person becomes aware of that they are being looked for and can change their identity or location in order not to be found. Another one is fundraising. I believe this one is effective to help the restoration centers for these victims, but we should do more in order to avoid them being placed in these situations in the first place. And a major one is advocating. I do believe this is effective, but that there should be more events and more people being able to know about them, and so they are able to attend and know this information. So the treatments victims go through. From the Defender Network, we know victims will be placed under certain conditions like diets for them to keep their shape, When the victims will not follow instructions, they would go under physical violence, and their personal items such as phones were taken away from them so they would have no communications. And victims didn't have a say as of to prostitution. So my proposed solution, 1 is increasing the surveillance around the city. The U.S. Department of State says how if we had concrete evidence that includes videos and photos of the sex traffickers with the victims, it would be much easier to track. That way, these victims could be rescued faster and reduce the physical and mental damage they go through. There would not be as much families waiting for months with hope, since it would be easier to find them. With cameras, there would be no denying of the ongoing issue because they could be proven wrong. Also, the businesses involved could be targeted and shut down, reducing the places where these actions can happen. So, using social media and influencers to teach residents current tactics sex traffickers use. In the article, 20 Ways You Can Help Fight Human Trafficking, it shows people with a bigger following are more likely to get to public and convince them of the sex trafficking issue and bring awareness. These media platforms that reach thousands of people daily want to show that sex traffickers are not always strangers and instead can be someone we continuously talk with. That the tactic used is lurement through objects and affection. They need to know that sex traffickers are no longer going to be picking up victims from the streets. There's different apps such as Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Snapchat, and many others that continue to rise where this information could be published. So, restricting the content that can be placed on apps. In the article report, Human Trafficking Spikes in Texas Amid Pandemic, we see the impact apps have. The creators of the app should be able to restrict the graphics uploaded since they never know the viewers. If the images are not as graphic, it will decrease the number of customers. This will then place less victims at risk. Overall, the spike will decrease. Another thing these owners could do is not allow payments for these types of videos and pictures, which will steer sex traffickers away as they look for the money side. So, hotels and motels reporting suspicious movement. News Centered Maine expresses how with hotels and motels reporting inappropriate actions, police could get on site and rescue the victims as well as catch these sex traffickers. Victims are able to be rescued faster when the exact location is provided, which is why the reporting can make a big difference. These industries could in the future be deeply affected and should think about the consequences. So what are some counter arguments to my proposed solutions and my response to these counter arguments? So for the increasing surveillance in the city is the amount of money that it could take to keep up with these monitors and establish cameras throughout the city, especially considering the size. But what I have to say is that when one has no clue where a family member or friend or someone we know is, no amount of money can account for that person. No money can take that feeling of desperation away. And this solution can prevent many cases and make our community safer. Using social media / influence to teach residents current tactics sex traffickers use. A counter argument can be that it is a very strong topic to talk about and can be sensitive to many, for it is broadcasted to millions. It can trigger many people who have passed through sex trafficking experience. What I have to say to this is that it makes one aware with the purpose of being informative. This can make others know the current tactics and use this information so that they do not become a victim added to the list. Restricting the content that can be placed on apps. Some will argue that this is an individual source of income, but there should be a limit as to what is placed on the internet to keep others safe, especially since the victims don't go willingly. It can also make it hard for the victim to get back on their feet if rescued when all over social media is their videos and images making them feel discouraged. Hotels and motels reporting suspicious movement. A counter argument can be that they make suspect movement that is not accurate and interrupt the visitors, making the industry look bad. What I have to say to this is that even if not completely sure, it is much better to be safe than sorry. Losing the income of one customer is nowhere near as losing a person. And even when you gain that person back or rescue them, They are not the same because of the experience they live. So I want to thank you for listening to me throughout this presentation. I hope you become more aware of how big of an issue sex trafficking is in Houston, that you're able to retain information and pass it on to others. And if you ever encounter a victim, have compassion for them and just know that they have been through really difficult times.